Also, in law enforcement, I understand there's an evolution and a serious interest to look into DNA matching.
Yeah, well,
And to start to DNA everything in sight. There's, of course, grave concerns of mine and other people about doing
well,
that, about the misuse of that ability. But I think that in the current Homeland Security, law enforcement, police overseeing things, alteration in technology, tasers, RFID chipping, and this whole kind of electronic surveillance society, the locking in on the DNA, I find is a part of that apparatus, although it's not pertinent necessarily to this conversation on a medical level. But I was wondering, in something you said about the Human Genome Project, you said if you have a leak in your house, it's not in the design drawing of your house, and you were comparing that with. There's information in DNA and proteins, but there's more. You're going to get a greater amount by looking at metabolites. Did I say that correctly?
Oh, yeah, pretty close. Firstly, don't think that I'm diminishing the value of learning about the structures, the codes in the DNA. It was quite valuable, and it was done by free enterprise, actually. There was a multi-billion-dollar government effort, but it was totally wiped out by one man and $100 million company that did the job instead. But no, what you're commenting on are my comments about the information content of various subsections of molecules in a human being with respect to what they can do about their health.
Right.
You can't do anything about your DNA. It's what it is. Now, maybe in some Star Trek future, we will be able to change our genetic material, but that's not now. No one living now will see any significant advances of that kind. But the design of your house is not what matters. If it's raining and the roof is leaking, you don't rush to the architectural drawings to figure out what about the design allowed the roof to leak. You have to go up and see where the hole is and patch it. So the protein molecules and the metabolites, manipulating the amounts of the things that the proteins make, that's the functional information about your house, and those are the things you can change by diet and by lots of other ways in which you can benignly interfere with the way your life is going. You can patch the roof in your house if you have the tools to go up, find the hole, fix it, and then go down below and see if it's still leaking. So DNA has less information in it that was helpful to someone in improving their health than do the protein molecules, and the metabolites have more information than the protein molecules themselves because they are the things that are actually, that's where the action is. That you could say, well, there's a vast economic system out there, and its design is interesting. The big people who manipulate it, the proteins, are also interesting, but what really matters to me is how much money's in my pocket, and those are the metabolites.
That's interesting. What is your take on the mitochondria role then?
Well, mitochondria are one of the structures that are important in cells. They perform very important structures, and there's a lot of metabolism in the mitochondria. They really are part of metabolism. That's where we metabolize, we get the energy to live. And mitochondria are made up of a lot of proteins that are able to take metabolites, which we obtain from eating our food. We eat our food. The food is digested into small molecules, which we would call metabolites. Those are transported through our blood and diffusion into the cells. The mitochondria in the cells, which are made up of proteins, take those metabolites and convert them into other metabolites, which provide the energy for us to stay alive. So mitochondria is a little factory made of proteins that converts some metabolites into other metabolites and takes some energy out during the conversion and gives it to us to live.
What is the discovery and the work that you're doing and your institute is doing with regard to a molecular clock for aging? I found that fascinating.
Well, this is fundamental biochemistry, and what we work on, our particular field of specialization involves 2 of the 20 amino acids of which proteins are constructed. These amino acids, particularly one of them, change with time after the molecule is made. And the change that occurs causes a charge to occur on the protein when the change takes place. These are in all proteins, and long ago, in the early 70s, we worked out this hypothesis that they serve as clocks. Every protein has some of these clocks built into it. These clocks decide how long the molecule will be there before it is replaced by a new one. They decide how the molecule changes into a different protein molecule, and the change has consequences for the living thing. They're clocks. So you can make these clocks run anywhere from with a half-life of a few hours to centuries based on how you build the protein molecule. And, of course, the DNA decides how that will be built. So we work on these clocks, work on how to figure out how fast they run and how they time biological processes. We
Fascinating.
Work on them because we believe they time most biological processes. These experiments are difficult. It is known that they time some biological processes, and the rest is yet unknown.
Most of your work now, or all of your work now, is privately funded, correct?
That's correct. We don't seek or accept any government funding.
That's a pretty unusual stand to take, isn't it?
It leaves us free to do what we think is best, and that's a freedom that most of our colleagues don't have.
How were you able to move from making a commitment to that to actualizing it? What do you think it took for you to get going on this? Most people are afraid to leave the government funding apparatus.
Well, this is something that I learned a lot about in the old days because Linus and I built an institute with this objective and succeeded in making the transition. First, you have to become very frugal about the way you spend money because you're asking the people who earned the money for it rather than a government agency made up of people who didn't earn it. So you reduce your efforts to those which you think are most important, and you pay a lot of attention to what you're doing so that with fewer resources than you would have on government grants, you're able to accomplish more.
It's an optimization, isn't it, of all your efforts?
You have to be efficient because you're spending someone else's money, and they're watching you because you're asking them for it. The second thing that helps is to have already a reputation in science and have done work in science that people will think is of value. So in the case of the institute we built long ago that Linus and I built, and this one, we benefited from the fact that over the years, my colleagues and I had done work which we could show to people saying, here we accomplished this, we can accomplish the next thing. And it'd be very hard for someone starting out to do this. They'd really have to go to work for somebody who is doing it. It's difficult. The third thing that makes it difficult today, of course, is the government is now taking so much money from the private sector and in taxes that there isn't as much money there for this. So if all scientists were to suddenly decide to raise their money in the private sector and taxation wasn't changed, there wouldn't be money there for them. Only a few scientists can do this because the resources aren't there because they've been taken by government. So these are all things that are part of it. But basically you have to have already accomplished something. It's kind of a bootstraps thing because you have to have something to show people that you've done. So it's easier for an older scientist working with new scientists to do it. And then you have to be pretty careful about the way you spend the money in terms of optimizing everything. If we were sitting in a university doing the kind of work we're doing, we'd have millions of dollars in government grants. Then you don't worry too much about what you're doing because you just, the money just comes. But if you're asking people that earn the money to help you, then you have to be a lot more careful about what you do. So we're not a very big place, but we do good work.
Do you have a certain time frame, or does a scientist work with a time frame for getting results very much the way business people feel a pressure to get the results? Like, do you feel pressure